With your permission, I'm going to get underway, okay?
Of course.
So, ladies and gentlemen, you're very, very welcome. Thanks for taking the time to be with us at this emergency special briefing. My name is Alex Benjamin. I'm part of the management team here at Israel Press Association. We're delighted to see so many of you here. I'm just going to ask you all, as a courtesy to our speakers, if you can mute yourselves. Obviously, it was an extremely busy weekend, unprecedented in many regards. Found myself looking at a video of what was happening overnight on Saturday. My 7-year-old came up beside me and asked me, "Daddy, are you watching Star Wars?" You know, in her imagination, what she was seeing on the screen was like something from a sci-fi movie whose repercussions were as far from fantasy for the people of Israel as one can possibly imagine. So we've brought with you and for you two leading experts, an editor of a Middle East Quarterly and director of research at the Middle East Forum, Mr. Jonathan Spire, and Benny Sabti, who is the Iran program researcher at Tel Aviv University's Institute for National Security Studies. My colleague, Tal Rabina, who's our director of strategy, will be introducing them to you in a bit more detail shortly. But briefly, for those of you who haven't been to an APA press briefing before, just a couple of house rules. I'll be opening the chat facility in a moment. I'd be grateful if you have any questions for our speakers to post the questions in that chat facility. We will endeavour to get as many of those questions answered as we can, and we will be calling you individually. So when you are addressing your questions, if you'd be kind enough to put your name and your media outlet, because some of you are joining from iPhones or from personal computers or iPads, etc. So we have no way of knowing, unless you're in the case of Mr. Bonifazi, who has Il Messaggero written beside his name. Just above that, I see a Castel, and we've obviously no idea which outlet is being represented. So without further ado, it's my great pleasure to hand over to my esteemed colleague, Tal Rabina, our Director of Strategy and head of our APA office in Israel. A lot of you will know him already. Supremely well connected. Tal, handing it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex, and good afternoon, everybody. And thank you for joining us for this APA special briefing following the Saturday night Iranian missile and drone attack on Israeli cities. This unprecedented attack targeting innocent Israeli civilians across the country included 170 attack drones or UAVs, 30 cruise missiles, and approximately 120 ballistic missiles with over estimated as 85 tons of TNT. Thankfully, and I must say amazingly, Israel and its allies, and we'll get to that point in a minute, have managed to intercept 99% of the ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and the drones that the Iranians have launched. There are a lot of questions stemming from this attack. What will be the aftermath of this assault to the wider Middle East? Is the very active involvement of the Arab countries that intercepted also the Iranian rockets and drones is a sign for more future cooperation, or is it just one of a time event due to the very heavy American pressure? How are the Iranian regime and people see the attack? And and of course, a lot of other questions that we will touch during this briefing. As Alex mentioned, you are most welcome to use the chat facility and ask the questions yourself, and we will be able to unmute you and let you ask your questions. We are very, very happy to have with us here today really two extraordinary experts who might be able to shed some light on this nightly attack. Mr. Benny Sabti, who is a researcher in the Iran program at the INSS and coordinator of the INSS podcast Voice from Iran in Hebrew. Mr. Sabti was born in Iran and raised primarily under the Islamic Revolution regime. After escaping Iran to Israel in 1987, he served in the IDF, leading all kind of projects relating to Iranian culture and influence on cognition, decision-making and media. One of the flagship projects he led was the establishment of the IDF spokesperson platforms in Persian, designed to address the Iranian people directly. Our second distinguished expert is our good friend, Dr. Jonathan Spire. Some of you have heard him before and met him personally on one of our briefings at European capitals. Dr. Spires, who is one of the very few Western Israeli experts to have traveled extensively in Syria, Iraq, and other major conflict zones in the Middle East. And I got his permission to reveal that he is just coming back, actually, just coming back from Syria a few days ago. It will be interesting to listen to what he has to say about that. Dr. Spire is a regular contributor to Jane's Intelligence Review, has published in leading journals and media outlets, including Middle East Quarterly, Times of London, Wall Street Journal, Guardian, Haaretz, Jerusalem Post, and he often appeared on CNN, Al Jazeera, Fox, BBC, Skies, and other outlets. We'll have 5 minutes each opening statement from our experts, and then, of course, we will be open for questions. Ben Sabti, may I ask you first, 99 of the missiles and UAVs were intercepted before they even reached the Israeli borders, and yet the Iranians seems to be, or at least pretend to be, very happy and very pleased from the attack. Can you please take us for a ride in the Iranian mindset?
Yeah, thank you for having me here and for the chance to discuss with you these issues. And I'm glad for the question because it's really related to issues of culture and influence and how each side understands the steps and the actions of the other side. So, of course, Israel neutralized and intercept all the missiles and drones, and this allies thing, that coalition that began to work to each other with each other is a very important thing. But Iranians look at the action, at the act itself, and they are very pleased with seeing that their missiles, Iranian missiles, were above Knesset, the Israeli parliament, above the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Yeah, they were intercepted, they were neutralized, but it was look like, and I say it as an Iranian also, and I read it after that in the Iranian newspapers or other places, other official. It is the regime side, I have to say, that yes, we were for a few seconds inside Israel. We penetrated the Israeli atmosphere. So for them, it's a kind of victory. It's not a whole victory. They didn't succeed to hurt any bases or any civilians, and I think that they don't want, and they didn't want also in this case, they didn't want to make any harm against the civilians, but they hoped for some casualties or results in the bases, but they are already happy with launching missiles and drones to Israel. Nobody prevented it. It's an important thing. In Iranian culture, preventing is more important than reacting. if we didn't prevent it before that, so they have a succession in their eyes. So from their eyes and their vision, it's also connected to their long-term vision. They could bring the destruction of Israel. This is the Iranian regime words in the newspapers in these 2 days. They could bring it a little closer, a little sooner. If you remember what the Iranian leader said a few years ago, that in 25 years, Israel will not exist. And all the steps that they see in these last 6 months, the war with Hamas and the massacre in October 7th, and even before that, the internal issues inside Israel, they see it as a prophecy coming true. So for them, launching the missiles were part of bringing this prophecy and step more closer to destruction of Israel. This is the part of the regime, of course, and we have to remember that most of the newspapers and official sites are run today. Really, it's not even like it was 5 years ago. They are run by IRGC. Almost totally, they are IRGC sites. It doesn't matter what name they have, but it became like a totalitarian regime that you see a lot of faces, you see a lot of sites, you hear a lot of interviews, but they say the same thing. It's like the Friday prayers in Iran, that all of them have their paper, they get it in Thursday, and they say the same thing in Tehran, in Shiraz, in Isfahan, and etc. The problem for them, and maybe kind of an advantage for us, is about the Iranian people. As we see in the last elections in Iran in March, in the last March, almost 80% of the Iranian people didn't even come to vote because they don't have any representative in the parliament that can represent them. So 80%, almost 80% of the people are kind of against the regime. We see it also in the economic issues, in the protests, in their activity in the social media and many other places. And the regime has almost about 15 to 20% of support, and all of them are IRGC related personalities or their families or economic activists who are related to the regime, because you cannot act in any issue in Iran if you are not related to the regime. So in the people side, in the public area, in the social media or in graffitis or in every place that they have a place to say what they really believe, we see that they support Israel. They were in panic, in a great panic from this operation or this war that happened. The Iranian newspapers actually, in Saturday already, they had a kind of vision that the attack will happen on Saturday night, because all of the economic papers, especially economic papers, they were kind of red, with the color of red, that it says that something bad is coming in the stock market and the dollar rates, and we saw it immediately. We saw it. So the people show their support to Israel and hatred to the regime and its action and its support to Hamas or Hezbollah, or even attacking directly Israel. In many ways, they know for sure, in their eyes. I don't know if there will be any Israeli reaction, but they are sure that there will be an Israeli reaction. I myself hope that we won't disappoint them. I hope so. But my opinion that it's not the matter.
But Ben, could you please, the Israeli war cabinet is adjourned right now and debating whether to react or not. Could you please elaborate what will be the meanings of the two options for the Iranian regime, if we will react or if we won't?
Okay. Okay, mostly we can talk about the regime, but also about the people, and you already heard that the people support us and support our reaction. They see it as a kind of the first step to getting rid of this regime. But the regime is also kind of expecting and waiting for some kind of reaction. This is their psychology and their way of thinking, that Israel, basing on events in past, for example, what happened in Six-Day War or the Entebbe operation. I know that I'm talking about the 60s or 70s, but these legends, they built the Iranian mind about Israel. So I'm going to say a very strange thing, but not reacting will be very kind of disappointing also for the Iranian regime. It means for them that they didn't understand Israel as well as they thought. And also the dangerous thought that they will have after that, that they could do it sooner, they could do it harder, and they could get rid of that. They could get out of that without any damage. So this is the dangerous thing with the Iranian kind of thinking. And if Israel doesn't react, it means for them other things. It doesn't mean for them that, okay, Israel considered all the objective conditions, and it became to that conclusion that it's better to contain the situation, to pass through and do nothing, and maybe for the next time. No, the Iranians understand other things from this step, or not taking the action. They will think that Israel is much weaker and we could do it better or sooner, and they will continue with that. This is the problem.
Thank you for that. I would just like to have Jonathan Spire with us for a minute with a very same question, Jonathan. What would the Arab neighbors of Israel would think of both options, whether if Israel will listen to Biden and President Biden and will hold its horses, or will decide to react in spite of this very determined American and European demand?
Yeah, well, yes, Tal. Well, first of all, I would say that there is a commonality between the way that Benny Sabti, my colleague there, described the Iranian regime's perception and the perception of the key states of the Arab world, including states which are aligned with the West and states which are enemies of the West and of Israel. That is to say, there is a kind of perception, both among friends and among enemies, that Israel is a consequential military power, which it is expected, therefore, that if it is dealt a serious blow, it will respond. And of course, then the judgment regarding whether you like that or not depends on which side of the line you fall. If you are Bahrain or United Arab Emirates or Saudi Arabia, that is to say, those Gulf countries which, in the case of the first two, formally, in the case of the third, not yet formally, have drawn closer to Israel in the last decades, precisely because of the shared threat of Iran. In the case of those countries, should Israel fail to respond, and should that fit into a larger perception, if such an impression goes on to be established, that Israel, in fact, is not the powerful, independent actor which perhaps they thought it was, then yeah, that will, I think, be registered as a disappointment for them. And I would suggest that this is not simply a matter of sentiments. This is a matter of perceptions which can have policy implications in the longer term. In my own view, I must say, therefore, the response is important. If Israel wants to carry on deepening the relations, interest-based, enemy-based, common enemy-based relations with the countries of the Gulf, then it should factor in that issue when it is considering its response. And of course, on the other side of the line, if we think of anti-Israel Arab states, interestingly, there isn't really very many anti-Israel Arab states anymore. What there is or are very powerful anti-Israel movements, some of which are the de facto dominators of states, such as, for example, Lebanese Hezbollah movement, or the Hashd Sha'bi gathering of Shia militias, who are the key power factor in Iraq today, and so on, or the Houthis, of course, which control a large part of Yemen. Of course, in the eyes of those Arab actors, should Israel prove itself hesitant and weak, then for them, obviously, this will be a matter of some satisfaction. And again, as with the Gulf states, in my estimation, it's not just a question of feelings or emotions. It is a question of those perceptions having policy implications. And in the case of these movements, the implication will be to encourage them to feel, okay, well, then we can afford to push a little bit further with regard to pressure on Israel in the real world. And specifically in the case of Lebanese Hezbollah, the others are important too, but specifically in the case of Lebanese Hezbollah, that can, of course, have very important implications, because right now, as you know well, since October 8th, the day after the massacre of October 7th, there is a very, very delicate balance being maintained between Israel and Lebanese Hezbollah of a kind of no war, but not yet full war, but certainly not yet the absence of war either, somewhere in between. So these perceptions are very, very important. And Israel, I certainly hope, will be taking all those factors into account when it considers its response to the events of April 13th.
But you know, we witnessed, Jonathan, a very active role of some of the Arab countries, literally getting into this war, even getting some threats from Iran for doing so. Of course, the Jordanians, for example, explained very loudly, so everybody will hear, that they were not defending Israel, but they're defending their citizens. But would you say that this is something that might happen again, or it was just a one-timer because of maybe the Biden administration very, very harsh pressure on these Arab states?
Yes, we were told, or we've learned, of course, absolutely, of the active Jordanian involvement over the skies of Jordan in downing both drones and missiles. And we are also learning of the reported role of both Saudi Arabia and Bahrain in supplying intelligence and information related to the events of that night. I would suggest that this is not something which we need to sort of be too surprised about. I mean, I understand exactly why in Israel it's a source of great satisfaction, perhaps also specifically in the case of Jordan, a matter of some surprise, given the clear domestic sentiments of the greater part of the Jordanian population, up to and including the Jordanian Queen Rania herself, deeply critical of Israel's current military operation into Gaza. So from this point of view, having sort of imbibed all that atmosphere and that criticism, maybe it seems surprising. But actually, if we look a little bit deeper at the strategic interests, and indeed the traditional strategic or maybe I should say better, long maintained strategic interests of Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, then we will quickly remember that whatever the atmospherics, whatever the rhetoric on the street level, the Jordanian monarchy is deeply aware that it stands or falls on its relations with the West and most importantly, United States of America. And I agree with what you said in your question that, the key factor, I have no doubt, impacting King Abdullah's decision and Jordanian behavior was indeed American influence and American pressure. But I don't think we should assume that's necessarily a one-off. What that tells us is that the Jordanian Hashemite monarchy's strategic position has not changed. It understands and we can be frank, I mean, it's not just a connection. It understands its dependence in security terms on the relationship with the United States of America, and even to some degree also the relationship with Israel in terms of intelligence sharing and so on, a very, very significant security relationship. And therefore its behavior makes sense in that regard. I would just add also to conclude this, that there is also a long tradition, both in the American side and the Israeli side, of a kind of tolerance for the Jordanian rhetorical atmosphere. It is kind of understood. I don't say necessarily this is good or not, but the West, the US and Israel, chooses to understand why the king has to allow or even himself indulge in sometimes furiously anti-Western and certainly anti-Israeli rhetoric as part of the very complex and delicate balance that Jordanian monarchs have to maintain. And I would just remind us that if we cast our minds back a long way to 1991 and the first Gulf War, the then King Hussein of Jordan behaved on a rhetorical level in a very similar way. That is to say, he said all kinds of things which were not, harshly critical of Saddam Hussein's invasion of Kuwait, and it was understood in the West as being, yes, this is simply part of the complicated cocktail of interests, so to speak, which Jordanian monarchs have to play according to. And I think that's also reflected in the rhetoric coming out of Jordan in recent weeks, compared with the behavior of Jordan over the skies of its own country in the last few days.
So thank you very much, Jonathan, and thank you, Ben, for this kind of opening statement that put us in kind of a orientation about the arena. We have quite a few questions, and Alex, if you please take
Yes.
those you find interesting, please.
Thank you, Tal. So we'll start off. We've got some great questions, which there's quite a lot to unpack. So we'll get straight into it. Aurora Minguez, delighted to have you with us again from Madrid, from Politico Exterior. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Aurora, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question? I'll give you a few seconds. Aurora.
Yes,
There
I'm
we
here.
are. You're very welcome.
Okay, thanks, Alex, and thanks, everybody. Related to what Ben said before, I was asking myself how Israel could help Iranian people to get rid of the Ayatollahs, because I think in a way it's a great interest for Israel to finish with this horrible regime. So how do you see the situation right now? Thanks.
Ben, please.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. A very important question. I myself wish that we could do more about that. The problem is that Israel has a lot of enemies. And now, in these days, as you see, Israel is very occupied with the military angle, with the actually fighting with these enemies. So it's a very hard mission to do that. And of course, Israel doesn't want to change, to make a regime change. People have to decide for themselves what they want. If they want our help or something like that, so maybe someone can help them in social media or I don't know, other issues, maybe more than that. I cannot go into to that, but the problem is that the Iranians must want enough. And another key issue is the United States attitude. In these 15 or 20 last years, we see that all the US administrations, they prefer to compromise with the Iranian regime and not to come to them with harder questions or human rights issues. They kind of forgive them for their actions against the protests. And even in the last protest, some Iranians in diaspora, they begged President Biden to support them or even say some two sentences against the regime, and he refused. They also relieved the sanctions. So this is a kind of question to come to U.S. administration much more than to Israeli. Israelis can defend themselves or help them with let's call it the propaganda issues or things like that. But actually, myself, was involved with the visit of the Crown Prince of Iran here in Israel. Actually, 1 year ago, if you saw that, Reza Pahlavi was here, and I was involved with that a little bit because I believe in some parts of the Iranian opposition. And we also went to a conference of the Iranian diaspora in London in September with Gila Gamliel, the minister Gila Gamliel. But after the war, it's very difficult to deal with this issue. Thank you.
Alex?
Thank you. Thanks. I've just got one more for you, Ben, if I may. It's one that comes directly from Carmen Gavrila from Romania, Radio Romania. Carmen, would you like to unmute yourself and ask a question? Or I'm very happy to pose it if for whatever reason you can't.
Thank you so much. It's so much easier this way.
Okay.
Yeah, my question referred to what scenario do you think is more possible? Either the Israeli response to the Iranian attack to take the form of a direct attack on Iranian territory, or a hit on Iranian proxies.
Okay, so these are confidential issues in the Israeli government or Israeli army. I don't have any inside information about that. So between the Israeli researchers or academic places, there are some opinions. Some think that Israel has to hit inside Iran because it was it's a suitable kind of reaction and response. Maybe and here the opinions are also different. Some assume that it will be against the nuclear facilities. Some think about it will be about against the IRGC facilities or base. Some say that maybe it will be all again an assassination against the IRGC or nuclear program scientists. I myself think that Israel won't go for nuclear issue any part of that because it's not. It will make it retaliated. It will make it harder for Iran to close the issue. So it can be against the IRGC figure or base, and it's also, of course, it's also easier if Israel wants to make the short way or the easier way. It's much more easier to do it again inside Syria or Lebanon. And the most important thing in this consideration is it has to be something that don't bring Hezbollah inside the issue, because Hezbollah is the most threatening power. Of course, Iran is behind that, but physically, Hezbollah is the most threatening power now against Israel. So we don't want them inside this issue. So it has to be some kind of balance, but we cannot know till that moment.
And if I may, since I caught you and you have a special insight, a very precious and special insight in the Iranian mind, there's been a lot of talk about how would regular Iranians react to a possible direct confrontation. I would just simply choose the word war between Israel and Iran. And I mean, like, those Iranians who oppose the regime openly or in their private, mind, people are being very divided on this issue, because they say that whether Iran will be attacked, even these Iranians who do not support the regime might gather around the regime, and they do you think it would be a situation like the one in the 80s with the Khomeini regime being a newborn and being strengthened by the war with Iraq, or something different maybe this time?
Yeah.
Maybe these Iranians will not defend the homeland and the regime. Thank you.
Thank you. In the history, every time that there was a very violent king in Iran, in the 10th century, 5th century, other cases, if there was a very violent king, very selfish king that killed the people and took their money and did all he could against the country and the people, at last the people who came and killed him or opened the gates for the enemy to come in, if it was the Arabs and if it was the British or other cases, and to bring a regime change inside Iran. Even Alexander the Macedonian, they opened the gate for him because their king was so against them. So from what I see in the social media, Iranians are very against the regime because of the economic issues, social issues, every issue in Iran. They are suffering from the regime. And my estimation is that they will open the gates. They will be very happy. They will have hope because of this attack or other attacks. I don't know. But and they will maybe become around the opposition leaders and not gathering around the regime.
Thank you, Alex. We have two questions from France.
Yeah, we've got a few of them, and what we'll try and do is I'll try and take them in a couple so we can get through as many as possible.
Okay, if you will, I just have a very short answer to a very short question about from Radio France International about how many the interceptions. So upon some Israeli research by INSS, which is Ben's institution, so it seems that 70 of the UAVs and 3 of the ballistic missiles were intercepted by the United States. I don't know how many the Jordanians intercepted. Maybe Jonathan or Ben, do you have any idea?
No, not specifically. I don't.
I just heard that all the ballistic missiles, I don't have the statistics. I saw that numbers, but I heard from other places, many other places, that all the ballistic missiles were intercepted by Israelis. The drones were, yes, it was done by the Jordanians, by the Americans, by others, but all the missiles were intercepted by the Israelis.
Yeah, and I must emphasize again, they were intercepted away from the Israeli borders, probably by Israeli jet fighters with the very great help of the F-35s. The new aircrafts that Israel just got from the States. Alex, please go ahead with the...
Yeah, sure. There was just another part to that question. Of course, it's very hard to estimate, but what would the cost of the activations of these various systems be during the attack? I mean, we know roughly what an Iron Dome missile costs to take down one of their sort of homemade missiles coming from Gaza. An operation like that, what are we talking about in terms of defensive amounts?
So the figure that was published here in Israel was 4.5 milliard shekels, which stands for 4.5 billion shekels. Of course, very estimated. I don't think anyone really knows. And I'm not sure that after such a short period of time, you know, the day after, we can already assess all the cost. One should also take into consideration that for that matter, the Iranian missiles did not get here, but the Israeli population had to change their way of life. No schools. Some of the activities were canceled. So I guess this is just part of the figures.
Okay.
Let's
Thanks,
go to other
Carl.
questions.
Jonathan, question for you from Cesar Bonifazi. Actually, two. So I'm going to take them. I'm sure Cesar won't mind. I'll read them out for brevity. Does the fact that Israel needed help from many countries mean that Israel is not self-sufficient in case of any further escalation? And a follow-on to that, also from Cesare, which was, do you think any reaction from Israel might open a more wide conflict that could involve Western countries? And then I've got a couple more questions after that, but perhaps you can deal with those two, Jonathan.
Yeah, I will try to. And just if I may, just in a sentence, just regarding the earlier question about Israel's likely response, just to say there is a kind of hierarchy of responses in these areas. And if you end up responding against a lower element on the hierarchy than the one that hit you, then actually you don't build deterrence. You can even build the reverse. And an example of that would be the very well noted Iranian habit when it's hit by powerful forces, by Israel or by America, of responding to junior clients of the West, and specifically to the very poorly defended northern Iraqi area of the Iraqi Kurds. We saw that even in just recent weeks. So you have to be careful with this. So the likelihood of Israel responding against a proxy, an Iranian proxy organization, as a result of this most recent attack of April 13th is extremely low. I think it won't happen. Maybe Israel won't respond at all. Maybe it will respond. But if it responds, I'm almost certain it will respond against Iran, an Iranian target itself, on Iranian soil most probably, or possibly not on Iranian soil, but it won't be proxies. With regard to Cesare's questions, regarding the first question, I mean, I tend to agree. I think that undoubtedly, the world, and again, both friends and enemies of Israel are observing strongly not only the events of April 13th, but also events since October 7th, in which one can get the impression that Israel is not able and does not consider itself able to fight on three fronts at once. That's to say, both against Hamas in Gaza and against Hezbollah in Lebanon, and against potentially Islamic Republic of Iran itself, without the help of its allies. Whether or not that is indeed the case, that is certainly the impression that has been given. Let me explain what I mean by whether or not that is the case. To some degree, the reason why the United States, I think, has been so proactive in helping Israel since October 7th is precisely because the Americans would like to limit the Israeli response. That's to say, when the USS Gerald Ford Carrier Group arrives to the Mediterranean immediately after October 7th, it's also, of course, to help Israel. But it's also to say to Israel, we don't want you to preempt against Hezbollah. We'll do that. We'll take care of the north. We don't want you to do it because we don't want there to be a general war between you and the Iran-led regional axis, because that doesn't fit in with that's to say, America's plans for the region. So without any doubt whatsoever, the international role in helping Israel, and most importantly, the American role, has been extremely notable. It's not only, though, because of Israeli limitations, it's also because, I think, of the American geopolitical considerations regarding the region, and specifically the extent to which the United States sought and still seeks to avoid any deterioration to general war in the region. And the Americans consider that harsh Israeli retaliation against a broader circle of Iranian allies, and indeed Iran itself, is more likely to bring about that outcome. So the Americans would rather say to Israel, well, we'll do that. You take care of what you need to take care of. So that's something else also to be borne in mind, I think.
Jonathan, if I may just jump in here and ask Ben, what is the Iranian perspective of what Jonathan just said? Of the American actually not letting Israel do what you said earlier it should?
They feel it, and but they exaggerate with the translation of that. They see the behavior and the relations between Israel and US as a kind of that US is not satisfied with Israel. It comes to these last months that the US is asking a lot from Israel, and Israel, for example, will we attack Rafah or will we not attack Rafah, or the humanitarian issue in Gaza and other things. So they take this issue of cooperating in that war against Iran. They take it to that place. They think that US will abandon Israel, for example. They really believe in that because Iranians are very black or white thinking kind of figures. They think that once they had an argue, okay, so now they are not enemies, but Israel is abandoned. And it's really hard for them to suddenly see that there is an allies around Israel, and they are helping Israel together, or maybe after that. So it's kind of another way of thinking.
So may I just throw the ball back to you, Jonathan? What is the perception of the Arab countries towards this American foreign policy?
You mean American acting to restrain Israel?
Exactly.
My sense is that it doesn't necessarily reflect badly on Israel. That's to say, if we can think of an example of a metaphor, if you are a strong animal, but you're being held back in a cage, nobody thinks that you're weak as a result of that. But maybe they think something about the one that put you in the cage. And this, I think, is something which one does hear quite a lot speaking to colleagues, specifically in the Gulf, in some of the Gulf countries, which is the sense that, yeah, actually, Israel is proactive and Israel gets the issue of power relations in the region. The country which worries a lot of those people is the United States. Whereas the sense is, yeah, the United States have a little bit taken their eye off the ball in terms of the meaning of power politics and the way that power is divided and contested in the Middle East. I don't think anybody thinks that particularly about Israel. At least that's not my sense. And I don't think that American restraint produces that perception in the minds of Arab elites either. Should I maybe try and answer Cesare's second question before we go on, which was
yeah, please do.
Yeah, which was regarding the issue of whether an Iranian-Israeli clash could deteriorate into a broader conflict. In this regard, let me say the following. I think we should not underestimate the determination of the Iranians, if they can at all manage it, not to clash with the United States. We need to take Iranian capacities and intentions very seriously. But also we should not have a sort of caricatured view of the Iranian regime, in my view at least, as a regime which wishes to clash with the entire world tomorrow morning, certainly not in conventional terms. I don't think it even wants to clash with Israel. I think what it wants to do is to get back to its policy of proxy warfare against Israel as soon as possible. But that's another discussion. But in terms of the United States, Tal mentioned that I just recently returned from Syria, and I did, and I was there researching the issue of Deir ez-Zor. I was down in Deir ez-Zor province, and it's fascinating there to note the way in which the Iranians and their supporting militias have taken action or took action against both American and American allied positions in Syria subsequent to October 7th. But it is also interesting to note that since the Iranians and their allies killed 3 American service personnel on January 28th in the Tower 22 position on the Jordanian-Syrian border, since then, very notably and noticeably, the Iranians have done everything they can not to harm the Americans. They're still trying to hit American allies, the Syrian Kurdish fighters. They're not trying to hit the Americans. And this, I think, tells us something of the extent to which the Iranian regime does not wish to have an open clash with the Americans, because it understands it could not possibly win such a clash. It gains a great deal, I think, from the quite dovish or pacific attitude of the American administration towards Iran. It has no reason to wish to disturb that. It wants to carry on gaining power in Arab countries through the effective use of proxy warfare, as it has done in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon, in Yemen, in Gaza also in recent years. And to do that, it needs to avoid open conflict with powers stronger than itself. I don't think Iran even wants open conflict with Israel if it can avoid it. It certainly doesn't want to get into an open confrontation with the Americans, and especially not an administration like the current administration, with which it has every reason and every incentive to try to not bother, because the administration is conducting a far from anti-Iranian policy, I would say, or anti-Iranian regime policy.
Thank you for that. As you all know, this is a very short noticed briefing. And we thank not only you, but also our expert for joining us in such a short notice. But unfortunately, Ben has to go to another commitment he has. So just if you have the time for 2-3 more minutes, if you can just give us some concluding remarks. And again, just so you will be able to run away afterwards, I would like to say right now, we so appreciate your efforts to be with us here today.
I can take one question instead of concluding, because we are in the middle of the storm, so I don't want to guess anything. I don't want to assess anything. Really, it can be other thing in 2 hours. So I prefer to take one question.
But Mr. Sabti, then this is a question coming again, just a sort of brief follow-up before I've got a couple more questions for Mr. Spire. But this one might be that you have some expertise on. Not only was Cesare from Il Messaggero in Italy asking about what potentially the US would do and other allies. What about other Sunni countries that are against Iran? Are they watching? What is their role? Are they waiting for a potential opportunity to strike? So other Sunni countries in and around the neighborhood, are they watching this closely, attentively?
Of course, from what we see, I think it's also a question for Jonathan. I say it just in my opinion. From what I see is it's that the Arab or Sunni countries are watching closely Iran and what is going on in this war, and also Iran is watching them to see. It relates also to Jordan activities or other activities. They are looking at them and watching, and they will remember which steps every country took, and they also can revenge against them, because the Iranians have a lot of patience. They can remember that Jordan did this and did that, and maybe Bahrain or UAE or other countries, and the most important is, of course, Saudi Arabia. And I understand totally how Saudi Arabia are a little bit more quiet than the others, because they are very cautious when it comes to Iranian regime. They remember their the attack against Aramco and the other cases. And from what I see from the Iranian side is that the hatred also toward Sunni countries or Sunni communities is also it's less from what it is toward Israel, but it is there, it exists, because I'm sure you saw that caricature, that cartoon that makes King of Jordan as an Israeli officer. Maybe some of you saw that. This was made by Iranian cartoonists from IRGC paper and other kind of these cartoons. So the way of their thinking is my enemies are gathered together. I'm alone in this issue, and I have to defend myself or attack any other country who helped Israel. So this is also what we have to be aware of.
And the fact that France and Great Britain were participating in the in this defend action should implement on the Iranian relationship with Europe or with the EU?
I don't think that it will be beyond foreign ministry. Iran foreign ministry called for the ambassadors of EU and gave them some notes but it was just words. They kind of admire the West and the European countries, so they are very cautious with them. It's not the same attitude toward the Arab countries. Toward the Arab countries, they feel that they are more supreme, but toward Britain or France, they can just protest, but nothing more than that.
So thank you so much for being with us. We appreciate your time, especially in such a rush time. And we hope to see you again in one of our APA briefings. Thank you, Ben. Alex,
thank you.
Any other questions?
So yes, obviously, thanks, Mr. Sabti. Wish you well. Thank you very much. Moving on, Jonathan, following on from that, I've just got a brief question from I-24 before we come to l'opinion in France. And Abderrahmani Amar, I'm so sorry if I've mispronounced that, was asking, do you think that the European Union will change its approach towards Iran after the attack on Israel? So, you know, the EU has often been seen as a touch soft, perhaps, on Iran, and do you think that that is likely to change? Will this have any influence on current EU policy before we come to l'opinion's question?
Thanks for that. Yeah, so I'm afraid this question and then one more is all I can take, because I also unfortunately have to rush off somewhere else. So my apologies in advance for that. With regard to EU, first of all, let me say that I think that, you know, the notion of a common foreign and security policy on behalf of the EU has always been more of an aspiration than a reality. And in reality, and this includes also policy towards Iran itself, European countries differ quite significantly. Having said that, I personally do not expect there to be any major changes in the positions of UK or France or Germany, for example, towards Iran as a result of this attack. I would say only that I think there is an incremental increase in concern in European countries, gradually leading in the direction of a harder line on Iran. And we can see a number of milestones in recent years, for example, with regard to the German proscribing of IRGC and so on. There are other examples, and Britain also being close to that. So incrementally, I think there is an emergent sense of Iran as a danger, which is growing and which is producing some policy results in European countries. And I would say that maybe this incident will add to that, but I don't expect it to lead to major policy adjustments in the immediate period. I don't think so.
Okay, thank you. Well, I really want to respect the fact that you have to go. So I do have one question, but
please.
Just very, very briefly from Lola Ovarles from l'Opinion in France. President Biden and the West are calling for restraint. What can they do to convince Israel not to retaliate against Iran? I mean, for instance, could they implement further sanctions? So what realistic pressure can Biden exert?
I think with regard to this, you know, one should also consider the possibility of incentives. In other words, I think we shouldn't forget that Israel also has a hand to play here, and Israel can go to Biden, should it wish to do so, and say, well, okay, you don't want us to retaliate. Fine, in that case, then let's work together on other issues. Let's work more closely together. For example, I'm only throwing this out as purely speculation, but for example, on the issue of Rafah, we regard it, we've heard the Israeli government say, as a primary security interest of Israel to enter Rafah. The Americans, we know, don't really want Israel to do so. So I should imagine that an Israeli government could say, okay, well, let's bargain. We think we should hit back at Iran. We understand that you very much don't want us to do so. Fine. So then work with us on the issue of Rafah. Or, for example, work with us on the issue of Hezbollah in Lebanon and what we should or should not do in that regard. So I suspect that a fairly, substantive negotiation will take place in which Israel also has what to demand and not only what to accede to. Of course, with regard to the American potential sticks, if I can put it that way, then yes, of course, as we've seen, American support for Israel, also in the United Nations, also with regard to spare parts and supplies of weaponry, also with regard even to deployment of forces in certain parts of the region, has been very, very significant in recent months. So undoubtedly, the Americans have what to demand and insist on as well. But I would suspect that there is a kind of credit side of the ledger here as well as a debit one, in which Israel can come to its partner in Washington and say, okay, well, you know, let's work together on a variety of issues. And if you want something on issue 1, we would like also to request something on issue 2 or issue 3.
Thank you, Mr. Spire. We'll let you go. Thank you so much for being with us. Tal, you also happen to be, you're very much more than the director of strategy for Israel. You have a long and illustrious career, both as a journalist and as an astute political observer. So with that in mind, I think it should be incumbent on you to sort of wrap things up here and give us your sense of how things are going. And then we can close this, given that both our guests have had to run off. Tal?
I'll be very not Israeli, saying I don't know. As you know, we all turn to say what is going to be in the future. There are too many balls in the air right now. The Israeli cabinet is meeting right now, trying to realize what will be the best to do. As we know, not only America is facing a very complicated political situation that I'm sure conducting some of the American foreign policy. Israel, as you all know, is facing some political crisis just as well. And bear in mind that we are in the midst of the war against Hamas. Everything is tied up with everything else. So I don't really think it will be a responsible comment to anticipate the future. I won't hesitate to say that probably Israel will do something because Netanyahu doesn't have any other choice. Whether it will be mild or not, this is for all of us to see. I just hope for better days.
Amen to that, Tal. So with that in mind, thank you everyone for being with us. We always indeed hope for better days. And we thank both of our guests again for their valuable insights. You should know that Mr. Sabti, even though he had to leave, has indicated that if anyone is interested, please send some follow-on questions or interviews or any requests that you have, and our team in Israel can handle those requests for you. As usual, this briefing has been recorded. If you can bear with us for a few minutes, we will download it, and we'll send that so that each of you has an opportunity to review some of the answers for any quotes or clips that you may need. So once again, we really very much appreciate your attendance on such short notice. To see so many of you is always not only gratifying, but it's also extremely appreciated that so many fine and respected media outlets across Europe still have a great interest in our particular corner of the world. On behalf of all of the APA team, we look forward to seeing you at a briefing further on down the road. And we wish you all the best, and we stand ready to answer any questions you may have going forwards. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.